Welcome to the Daily Views on September 22nd, 2021. And today we start in Toronto in Canada. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau won the early parliamentary elections in Canada, but missed his goal of an absolute majority with his Liberal Party. The results gives him a clear mandate to form a government, Trudeau said on Tuesday. The Conservative opposition leader Erin O'Toole has already admitted defeat. He called on Trudeau to congratulate him, he said in his home constituency outside of Toronto. Trudeau has been in power since 2015 and has ruled with a minority of seats in the House of Commons since 2019. After a presumably close election result, he is now heading for another minority government. The House of Commons has 338 seats and a party must win 170 to get a majority. The Liberals currently lead in 156 electoral districts. That would give them one more seat than before the vote. The 49-year-old Trudeau had called the early vote a few weeks ago with the hope of an absolute majority, among other things, due to the relatively successful corona policy of his government. His calculation did not seem to work out, which is likely to leave a more than bland aftertaste. The polls had recently been tighter than the Liberals had wished for. The top candidates of the other parties and many Canadians had accused them of reaching for an absolute majority despite a fourth wave of the pandemic and a relatively stable minority government, and thus wasting time in the fight against COVID-19 and potentially endangering the health of voters. In general, Trudeau's Liberals tend to benefit from the electoral system in Canada. The mandates in the 338 electoral districts are distributed according to the principle of absolute majority. Only a few dozen contested districts are decisive, especially in the suburbs of the cities of Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, somewhat comparable to the swing states in the USA. Trudeau has ruled the North American country with almost 38 million residents since 2015. From 2019, he led the country with only a minority of the seats in parliament in the capital, Ottawa. Traditionally, there are no coalitions in Canada, but either absolute majorities or minority governments with an average half-life of 2 years. The last vote in autumn 2019 brought the Liberals to 157 seats and the Conservatives to 121. Historically, the Liberals have been the most likely government in politically moderate Canada. In addition to the climate crisis, domestic political issues such as the rising cost of living and healthcare dominated this election campaign. According to experts and pollsters, despite some political successes, Trudeau has developed a credibility problem among parts of the Canadian population. This has to do with big but not always kept promises and several scandals. Trudeau's star appeal, which won the 2015 election against the Conservative Stephen Harper by pledging a new, transparent and modern style of leadership, has worn off after 6 years as Prime Minister. And now let's go to Bangkok in Thailand. Thailand's popular capital Bangkok is not expected to reopen to international tourism until November. In order to receive visitors again, at least 70% of the inhabitants of the mega metropolis would have to have complete vaccination protection, the newspaper Bangkok Post quoted the local governor Aswin Kwanmuang on Tuesday. Currently, only 42% of citizens are double vaccinated. It's estimated that the city has more than 10 million inhabitants. If the vaccination campaign continues as before, Bangkok could open in the first or second week of November, the city council said at least. However, other conditions are that the number of infections continues to fall and the hospitals are not overcrowded. Most recently, around 2,700 to 2,800 new cases per day were reported in the big city. If all criteria are met, a decision should be made on the guidelines and rules for opening up. And now let's go to Melbourne in Australia. The Australian authorities are closing all construction sites in Melbourne, a city of 5 million, for 2 weeks. hundreds of people protested against mandatory vaccination for construction workers over the weekend, despite a strict lockdown. The unauthorized demonstration turned into violence, including against union officials. The largest Australian cities, Sydney, Melbourne, and the capital Canberra, have been in lockdown for weeks to contain an outbreak of the highly contagious Delta variant. And now let's go to Brussels in Belgium. The United States and the European Union announced the global methane pledge on Saturday. This is an initiative to reduce global methane emissions. It is due to be launched at COP26 in Glasgow in Scotland in November. US President Joe Biden and Commission President Ursula von der Leyen appealed to countries to join the initiative and welcome those who have already indicated their support. Methane is a powerful greenhouse gas and, according to the latest report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is about half responsible for global warming by a net 1.2 degrees Celsius since the pre-industrial age. A rapid reduction in methane emissions complements measures targeting carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. It is considered to be the most effective strategy to directly reduce global warming and to achieve the goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Countries that join the global methane pledge are committed to the collective goal of reducing methane emissions worldwide by at least 30% compared to in 2020 compared to in 2030 compared to the levels of 2020. That's the way. And to endeavor to quantify methane emissions using the best available methods of generating emission inventories with a special focus on large emission sources. The European Union and 8 countries have already indicated that they will join the global methane pledge. These countries include 4 of the 10 largest methane emitters in the world, and together they account for more than a fifth of global methane emissions and almost 50% of the global economy. The EU has been taking steps to reduce its methane emissions for almost 30 years. The strategy adopted by the European Commission in 1996 has helped cut methane emissions from landfills by almost half. As part of the European Green Deal and to support the EU target of climate neutrality by 2050, the EU adopted a strategy in October 2020 to reduce methane emissions in all key sectors such as energy, agriculture, and waste management. Reducing methane emissions this decade is a key element of the EU's ambition to cut greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030. And now let's go to San Salvador in El Salvador. El Salvador's, let's say, controversial president Nayib Bukele is now introducing himself, apparently ironically, on Twitter as the dictator of the Central American country. The biography of his Twitter profile on Monday said dictator of El Salvador. So far, the 40-year-old conservative had referred to himself there as Layla's dad since the birth of his daughter in August 2019. He had previously described himself in his profile on the short message service as the best-looking and coolest president in the whole world, after he became the youngest head of state and government in his country in June 2019. Bukele uses Twitter a lot, also to give instructions to his ministers. His opponents recently called him a dictator, including at demonstrations after the introduction of the cryptocurrency Bitcoin as legal tender. It was also shocking that Bukele had soldiers deployed in parliament in February 2020 to force approval of the financing of his security concept. After his party Nuevas Ideas, that means New Ideas, achieved a clearly majority in parliament in an election, it replaced all 5 constitutional judges of the Supreme Court in May. The new judges decided a few weeks ago to lift the ban on the president's second term in a row. International observers warned that democracy in El Salvador was quite in danger. And now let's go to New York in the USA. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has warned the US and China of another Cold War. In an interview with the AP news agency, Gutierrez demanded that both states had to repair their completely disturbed relationship before the problems became too big and spread to the rest of the world. As the world's leading economic powers, the USA and China should work more closely together on climate protection, for example, and disputes on trade and technology issues must also be resolved through negotiations, despite political differences, for example on human rights or the economy, Gutierrez clarified. And he said, "Unfortunately, we only have confrontation today. It is essential to re-establish a functioning relationship between the two states in order to be able to face major global challenges such as climate change or fighting pandemics. This would not be possible without a constructive relationship between the two superpowers." Yeah, Gutierrez warned 2 years ago that the world would be divided in two if the US and China continue to create rival rules for trade, currency, financial transactions, or the internet. Gutierrez has now renewed this warning. He added that two rival geopolitical military strategies are also dangerous and contribute to the division of the world. Therefore, the nuclear powers should have to repair their relationship quickly. Gutierrez said, "We must at all costs prevent a Cold War that would be different from the previous one and probably more dangerous and difficult to handle." There were clear rules between the USA and the Soviet Union, and Gutierrez said that both superpowers were always aware of the dangers of a nuclear conflict. There have been channels and forums to ensure that the situation does not get out of hand. Today, however, everything is more fluid. Even the experience that we had in dealing with crises in the past is no longer there, said Gutierrez. The UN Secretary General also addressed the US-British plan to jointly equip Australia with nuclear-powered submarines in order to strengthen security and military deterrence in the Indo-Pacific. This project was heavily criticized last week, among others by China, which feels provoked by the announcement of the new three-party alliance. This too is only a small piece of a complex puzzle, said Gutierrez, of this completely dysfunctional relationship between China and the United States. Dysfunctional, that brings me to someone. Let's go to Moscow in Russia. Despite massive allegations of manipulation, the Kremlin sees no reason to doubt the legality of the parliamentary elections in Russia. The vote was free and fair, said spokesman Dmitry Peskov on Monday in Moscow, according to the Interfax agency. And he said, "In this regard, we rate the election quite positively." The independent election observers of the Golos organization listed thousands of violations. The team of the imprisoned Kremlin opponent Alexei Navalny spoke of the dirtiest election in years. In the parliamentary elections in Russia, the Kremlin party is clearly in the lead after counting more than 90% of the ballots. United Russia has so far come to 49.6%, said the election commission in Moscow. The communists landed at 19.5%, the right-wing populists of the LDPR of the ultra-nationalist Vladimir Zhirinovsky at just under 7.5%, and the Just Russia party at 7.3%. The new party Novye Lyudi, I think that means new people, was just above the 5% hurdle. All parties are considered close to the Kremlin. The United Russia Party, supported by Russian President Vladimir Putin, celebrated its victory on Sunday evening when few votes were counted. They hoped for a new majority of 300 of the 450 seats in parliament, thanks to many direct mandates. 225 seats are allocated through direct mandates. The Kremlin expressed satisfaction with the performance of the ruling party. The party's task was to defend its leading position. This task was certainly accomplished, said spokesman Peskov. Compared to the Duma election in 2016, however, the Kremlin party has apparently suffered losses. At that time, they got 54.2% of the vote. The communists, on the other hand, made significant gains. 5 years ago, they had reached 13.35%. Surveys had shown United Russia, in view of the great dissatisfaction with the economic and social situation before this election, at less than 30%. And so the opposition accuses the power apparatus of manipulating the election in favor of the Kremlin party. The supporters of the imprisoned government critic Alexei Navalny had called for a coordinated protest election against United Russia with a so-called smart vote in order to break their monopoly on power. And now, let's go to another power like this, go to Pyongyang in North Korea. North Korea's controversial nuclear program is in full swing, according to international nuclear watchdogs. This included the enrichment of uranium and the extraction of plutonium, said the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, Rafael Grossi, in Vienna on Monday. And he said, "In the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the nuclear program is going at full throttle." He said that at the beginning of the annual meeting of the IAEA member states. In doing so, Pyongyang is clearly violating several UN resolutions. The IAEA inspectors have no access to the isolated country, which has already carried out several nuclear test explosions for the development of nuclear weapons. The Vienna Atomic Authority, however, uses satellites to observe the nuclear facilities. In the run-up to the IAEA conference, the IAEA reported signs that North Korea had restarted the nuclear reactor in its controversial Yongbyon nuclear center. The small reactor can supply plutonium for making atomic bombs. Nuclear warheads can also be built with enriched uranium. A week ago, North Korea reported the successful test of strategically important missiles and indicated that the guided missiles were also being developed for nuclear warheads. For years, Pyongyang has been promoting the development of missiles that not only hit South Korea and Japan, but also can carry nuclear warheads as far as the United States. North Korea has declared itself a nuclear power. According to estimates by the American organization Arms Control Association from August 2020, there are 30 to 40 nuclear warheads in North Korea. So nothing not to worry about. And I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.